Very good morning to you. Thanks again for joining us. With that clip in mind, how long do you think before we as South Africans can get our identities sorted?
Well, Ayanda, I think we should start now, but also we must be informed by our history. Our history tells us that right at the beginning, when we started to struggle against colonialism, we were claiming our Africanness. And we should follow that, what happened after that. I am very inspired many times by what happened in 1492 when the Khoisan trained cattle to be able to fight alongside them against the Portuguese when they were trying to land and colonize that part of West Africa. That's where our struggle starts. At that point, we made a very clear, clarion call to everyone who's in African that the African continent needs to be protected because it is an African space. Now the question is, how have we used this African space? On what basis have we understood the African space? If I look at a clip which happened now, I would refuse to respond to pathological analysis of what an African is. I want to be very positive, start by saying I'm an African, understanding that I'm an African, and also quite recently UNISA made me an honorary professor. I want to use that category to probe and say, what does this mean? In other words, look at the whole African continent and say this space, if we were to use it properly within the global context, as Africans, what would we do? We are not Americans, we are not Europeans, we are not Asians, we are Africans. What does that mean?
But it is a discussion or a debate that continues to rage in Walter Serote, what it means to be an African. It can be one that unifies, and it can also be very divisive in terms of the answer to that question.
I think it depends on where we start. First, when I talk about being an African, I come from a non-racial position. That's what the struggle taught me. Secondly, when I talk about being African, I realize that a definition of that must be within the context of diversity. In other words, being an African, I have to embrace and be inclusive of everything that is on the African continent. If I start from that point, I will realize the variety of what it means to be an African. But there is this thing which has to be addressed, the African voice of Africans, or the indigenous people. And I'm saying they did not fall from heaven and found themselves here. If they did, after they found themselves here, they did something. What is it that they did?
And that's what you're looking at when you focus on the indigenous knowledge systems. Tell us a bit more about the series that you're undertaking.
Correct. I'm going to be talking to young people about creating this thing as an honorary professor. I'll be talking to them and saying, our people created institutions long before colonialism. Institutions of the Khosi, chiefs, so-called chiefs, institutions of initiation, institutions, as you are seated there, Ayanda, when I look at you as an African, I see a person, one person in five institutions surrounding you. Our people did not make a mistake when they said that you are a Rakadi, you are a mother, you are a woman, you will be a wife, or you are a wife, you are a sister. All these things have a role. And that already defines how we as Africans must define a family, which is the crux of a society. How do we ensure that every member of the family begins to understand that they have a role to play in the family, in the community, on earth? Starting point. If you then take several of those families and put them together and create a community, there is an understanding as to how one individual comes into this community.
And what's the aim of the series? What purpose do you hope to achieve?
We're trying to create a consciousness of being an African. If I say I'm an African man, what is my role in South Africa? What is my role in the global context? What is my role when I say I'm an African man within a context of a diversity or a non-racial position? What does that mean? In other words, we have to do away with the biggest crime that we ourselves committed as Africans when we believed what the colonialists said about us, that we are inferior, we are pagan, we are primitive, we don't know what we are supposed to do, we're running around here.
And what do you say when you hear of reports such as this controversial UCT student report, which says that black people are less attractive? When you hear some of that, do you think it re-entrenches some of the colonial lies that were spread about the inferiority of black people?
We are just regurgitating what colonialists thought about us, or what people who had constructed apartheid in our country think about us. And that's where we should detach ourselves. That is what we have to find a rational, a discourse that continuously negates that, coming from us, not reacting to what people have said, but affirming who we are, creating a consciousness that says we know who we are and what we know, also our history, we know where we come from. We have this big continent which we must rebuild ourselves.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Serote. That was poet and author, world-renowned Walter Serote.